Hello, this is Daniel Bruce, and I will be doing my capstone project on the 735th Air Mobility Squadron, or 735th AMS. It will be covering the project and governance planning portion, as well as IT strategies, governance, network frameworks, and also highlighting areas of opportunity, areas of problems, and where we can excel or also we need to improve upon. The 735th AMS serves as a rapid deployment point that will deploy resources and personnel across the Pacific, Indian Ocean, and back to the United States. It serves as a focal point to refuel, process cargo, and personnel prior to departure from the U.S. and also returning into the U.S. Now, the 735th AMS is facing economic, technological, and environmental issues, both at sites that it supports and also where it's located at in Hickam, Hawaii. I'm currently serving as the 735th IT Systems Manager with a shop of, or an office of, 3 military and 3 civilians, and we service 325 personnel across 5 geographically separated locations. I currently have one IT department manager that sits above me. He pretty much meets with the top management of the organization, and I can sit in when he's not there or if it's just military only. Now, the 735th AMS does focus with the value statement on safely, then by the book, then on time, in which it prioritizes safety first, and then afterwards it would start looking towards governance and doctrine, making sure we follow the book, and then lastly is trying to get it done as soon as possible. We want to make sure we deal with safety first prior to anything else. Now, the main roles that are located, or the main functions for the 735th AMS, is the aircraft maintenance, the cargo processing, the airfield management, and also the passenger processing. The IT aspect of it plays a supportive role for each of the functions and actually has become a large portion for each function. Now, the 735th AMS has many governance that's already in place, and I will be going over those during this presentation as well as discussing a new project and how it would route in this particular situation doing a server upgrade. I will also be discussing the 735th AMS's IT strategy and how it's currently changing and how it's changed from the past. Now, the 735th AMS also has to do a backbone for its network off of the Hickam Air Base network, which is controlled by the 747CS, and that will be covered also in the next slide. Now, the 735th AMS IT department primarily focuses on the availability, functionality, and security of all 735th IT assets and also the network itself. Now, the IT management function, or my function, would be primarily to eliminate paper waste or e-waste, continuous process improvement, improving the communication between agencies, and then also providing 24/7 electronic resource availability. Some of the challenges we do face is the Air Force is moving towards a centralized IT service support, which is forcing the base to control a majority of responsibilities, and that's starting to blur our responsibilities with them. So we're having to make memorandums specifically for our two organizations to separate where our role or our responsibilities end and where theirs would begin. We also are facing issues, or more so a inconvenience, as far as having to contact the base level to whenever we need to get resources or anything approved as far as getting acquired equipment or also technological advances. Now, the IT functions that we do provide, we have to essentially ensure that we follow the proper guidelines that also blur the lines between other roles, which includes the aircraft maintenance, the cargo processing, the personnel processing, and airfield management, can sometimes make it to where the IT function and those functions don't quite translate their governance to each other. Now, again, I operate as the 735th Cyber Systems Manager, and I do have an office of 3 military personnel and 3 civilians, and we do service 325 personnel across the 5 geographically separated locations. My office is in charge of servers, hardware and software, and even the IT peripherals that are located at client desk. And my office is not required to identify the needs of an IT system, but more so to provide the solution for any issues that leadership or any other office identifies themselves. We typically try to have a consistent backup of accounts and data running constantly, and we also have backup servers to have those readily available. Now, many of the server level or the backup programs are actually ran at base level, and those would be Outlook and SharePoint, which is the email and the websites. Those are typically ran by them since they're cloud hosted, but my organization or my office actually handles the on-site file servers and the print servers, so that way it's backed up, and if disaster were to strike, we have a separate backup server that's also geographically separated. We also have our own, we have to serve also as the first line responders in case of incidents or a information leakage or any kind of tampering goes on. We're essentially acting as the first responders, disconnecting systems, the accounts, and essentially informing the base level about the incident prior to having to disconnect and also wipe all the remnants of the data or whatever was compromised, and then recovering all of the user's information. Now, the 735th Air Mobility Squadron does have a multitude of issues or challenges that we face, specifically the IT department on a regular basis. One of the big ones is technology refreshing, understand the different responsibilities between the different roles and the different ethics that's faced with those roles. Leadership misinterpretations and misunderstandings, and also meeting new IT requirements. The main issues with the new technology refreshes is that they typically have to get approved by internal leadership and then external sources as well, which can be delayed by a long shot. And then also having a set supply or set providers that are set only because of being on an island. We do not have as many resources as compared to being in the United States or in Japan, where there's a lot larger of a vendor availability. But the main issue for the different responsibilities and ethics, a lot of the times the roles, again, do not translate their regulations or their governance over from one role to another. So maintenance or cargo processing would not be able to understand ISC2, which the IT entities are supposed to be held by. And so sometimes responsibilities or requests that they ask for do not meet those or meet our security guidelines. And we have to explain that in a way that's more understandable to their level. And vice versa, whenever we're trying to go out with them, they also have to translate to us what their roles and responsibilities are. And leadership themselves has a different background. They don't have an IT background. All of leadership is actually either maintenance, airplane maintenance, or they have a cargo background. And so they'll understand those governance, but they won't understand IT. And we also have to explain those requirements to them too. And sometimes it does get to a point where we have to actually inform them when something is not able to be done because it doesn't meet security requirements, and also provide a solution or an alternative. Now, lastly, the IT requirements with newer governance is also a issue, or more so a challenge that we face, in that there's typically civilian governance that's released, but the Air Force also has their own set of governance that they also release that's a specialty, and we actually have to reach out to a separate organization to receive those governance and also look into them ourselves, because some things are covered by Air Force and some things aren't covered by Air Force, and we have to actually find those specific areas that are covered by each specific governance. Now, the different accesses or uh, different responsibilities also gives us a um, challenge as far as Microsoft Access and SharePoint, because the base level, since they control them, we typically do not receive the training. Then also people expect us, or members, clients expect us to actually be able to understand how each software that we install performs when we do not have specialized training. So this has become a repetitive issue in which we are only responsible for installing and also ensuring it's the newest version of a software, but not knowing exactly how it functions. So, for example, Microsoft Excel, we don't have specialized training for it, and so it's just based off of whatever experience or knowledge we've had from other locations. Now, we are also expected to administrate our servers and serve as systems administrators for some of the systems we have located where we're at within our building. And we also do have to make sure that they are up to date on hot fixes, updates, and security. But one of the biggest things, as far as making sure that requests are understood as meeting security, it also goes into the ethical issues and the ethical parameters. We have to make sure they actually fall in those ethical parameters prior to agreeing to perform a project or performing an install or request. Now, there have been times where we've had to have tried, where leadership did know governance that we've presented, and we've actually had to raise the issue with our IT department lead manager, and he's had to bring it up to his leadership as well. And we've been able to make workarounds a lot of times, but sometimes we've also had to delete or remove projects as well. Now, mission security is one of the main programs that we've had absolute governance, have an absolute governance that we must follow by the T, and pretty much if it's deviated from in any way, it actually increases the probability of risk being taken and also a possible compromise. The 735th AMS IT department is currently facing multiple issues that stem from economic, technological, and also social issues. The economic side of it is we currently have issues as far as um, doing more with less, or more so, we're getting rid of IT personnel. Like my slot itself is actually going away because we're getting rid of some servers because of the move to cloud, which is handled by the base level. So we're trying to do a lot more with less personnel, IT personnel, but also increasing the responsibility with having multi-capable airmen, or MCAs, which is being able to help other functions with their primary roles without having our own career identifier changing itself. So, for example, I should be able to help a cargo processor upload or download cargo, or a maintenance person marshal a plane, or just doing different things as far as just helping, or even airfield management, just being able to help them. But the issue with that is we are also cutting down on personnel. Another issue we are facing that's technological is that we are facing issues with technological advances and not having governance already set in place by the government. So we typically want the newest technology available. For example, we've had somebody request Wi-Fi on the flight line, which is allowed, but the newest Wi-Fi was not allowed because its strength was so strong to where it could actually reach beyond the flight line onto the civilian sector or private sector and actually be surveilled by an adversary if an adversary was connected to it, and we would not know that they're actually surveilling the military network. Now, another technological issue we are facing is that we are not able to get the newest technology in the environment we're in just because we're on an island. So we're not able to receive all of the newest. It's based on the vendor's availability. A big issue that we are facing as far as a social issue is that the separate functions, which are the primary ones, do not translate that well into the IT aspect and vice versa. So we are not able to communicate the governance that well, whether it's maintenance talking to us or we're trying to translate our stuff for, say, cargo processing. Our stuff does not translate or equate to any of the same governance or how we view things. So we typically have to translate for each other how our job functions or what we have to have done typically. We also have a issue that we face that with us trying to do more with less. The multi-capable airman is a concept that we're just starting. Um, it is part of the Agile program, or Agile ACE um, principle, which is actually first initiated by the Air Force level. And it's just starting as far as the beginning steps for the multi-capable airmen for the 735th AMS. Now, the 735th AMS has multiple IT governance that's already set in place. Some of them include the 800-53 NIST Special Publication, or NIST SP, and the AFI 33-204. The NIST SP 853 is the primary framework that we use as far as guidance for the Air Force, and then the AFI 33-204 contains our separate or support functions, which include communication security, computer security, and mission security, which our organization and multiple other ones actually use these across the Air Force. AFI 800-53 was actually derived from the CNS's security model, also known as the Macomber cube. There were three aspects of the cube, which was the security countermeasures, the information states, and the information characteristics. And they all had their own subsets. Many people know or have heard at least of the reference to one of the layers, which is the information characteristics, which includes the CIA model, or the confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Now, this was used specifically for NIST SP 800-53, which is what the Air Force uses today. In the next slides, I will be showing the Air Force's current governance and governance frameworks, and also what's currently used today for each role, responsibility, or program, which was previously used in my previous class in ITM 517 in 2021. These will be covering the 735th program specifically for the ComSec portion. That's covered under the confidentiality of the information characteristics, and then the transmission state, or transmission of the information states, and then also the training and also the practical or practices and policies. So for the ComSec training itself, it is pretty much a PowerPoint-based training. And then also we have information assurance training, which is provided by the Air Force level. And then we also have the ComSec program itself, or communication security, communication transmission access control. Then we have the encryption and decryption devices that are handled within the ComSec program. This is all pretty much to raise awareness within the squadron or our organization about communication security and securing all the ComSec devices. These policies and practices actually fall under the transmission portion of the confidentiality still, is the data in transit. The policies that fall under it are the CompuSec, or computer security, which is AFMAN or Air Force Manual 17-1301, which covers the NIST cryptography that is handled by the encryption devices. The MSEC program, which is also known as Tempest, is covered under the Air Force Instruction, or AFI, 71-101-B3, or version 3, and FPD, or Air Force Pamphlet Doctrine 33-2, which is a mission security. And it enforces the requirement for having a specific amount of space in between devices to make sure there's no data spillage or unauthorized access in between the items, or between unauthorized devices. The last one is CNSSI, which is the CNSSI 1300. Now I'm pretty much covering the slideshow on this one, but is the control of pretty much sensitive tokens or sensitive information on tokens and the digital certificates that we use. Right, still under the transmission portion of confidentiality is technology security assets. But we have AFMAN 17-1301, which covers the control of identification cards and certificates, which actually pertains to not just IT, but also to security forces, or to military personnel in general, because you're supposed to be controlling your form of ID at all times. And then we also have, under technology, the PKI, or the PIV identification that's stored on the identification cards that we hold. And then also the VPN portion of the network, which encrypts our data in transmission whenever it goes over a public network. Now, the storage portion of the confidentiality information characteristics is the training portion. For the training portion of awareness, we have the IA training for covering for that, and then ComSec, which serves as the PowerPoint and Microsoft Word quiz to ensure that users are aware of the storage portion of data. Next, we have the CNSSI 4001, which describes the control of cryptographic items, or essentially the encryption items, making sure that they're secure and always monitored as they're controlled items. And lastly, on this one, we have the CompuSec, or Computer Security Air Force Manual 17-1301, which is ensuring that we use ID cards and PKI certificates to access the information systems provided by the Air Force, or anyone that we're allowed to be on. So continuing with the policies and principles of data storage and keeping it confidential, preserving the confidentiality, would be the PKI, or infrastructure for certificates that are used to access the IT systems. And then the technology that's used to preserve data storage is the smart card tokens, or PIV, or identification cards. The ACAS scans, firewalls, and the cipher lock doors are used to actually secure the data storage. Now, the education and training for processing data itself and converting it to be used by data systems would be the ComSec training itself introduces the processing of data in PowerPoint format or in Microsoft Word quizzes. And we also have the policies and practices. That's pretty much the ComSec program itself. And then lastly, the technology to actually protect the processing of data would be the smart card PIV cert, or the identification card. Editing permissions or rights to safeguard or make sure prevents unauthorized access. And lastly, the Active Directory services is also another form of the permissions or rights. Now, preserving the data integrity while in transmission would be the information assurance training that's also offered by Air Force level that's introduced then. Then the AFMAN 17-1301 and CNSSI 4009 are both policies that cover the coverage of transmission or data in transit and the integrity of it to where it has no modification. The technology that preserves data in transmission would be the encryption algorithms and also devices that fall under the KG-175 model. The data storage integrity under the integrity layer would be the training that's used would be the IA training again. And it is also covered under the AFMAN 17-1301, and then the permissions rights would prevent unauthorized access and also prevent the modification of data. So if you have read-only rights, it prevents it from being altered by unauthorized users. Or HBSS would also alert and also prevent the access and modification of software and hardware or data on systems that's unauthorized. Now, the education and training for processing would be the information assurance training that is offered by the Air Force, the CSL training that the cyber systems liaisons, which would be me and everybody in my office, received it over Zoom, which is provided by the base level, and as a prerequisite, you have to have Security Plus to actually receive the training. And all of this is covered under the policies and practices AFMAN 17-1301. And technologies that preserve or make sure that we use the processing of data and retaining the integrity would be the technology known as smartboard software and the permissions and rights. Smartboard software actually ensures that the data in transit is actually going to a location or coming from a location that's actually authorized. And then also same with the permissions and rights. It's just making sure that the data is actually staying secure, making sure that it's not modified by unauthorized personnel. Now, the availability or the education and training for transmission of data and ensuring it's available is the OPSEC training, which actually makes sure that it's based pretty much on the unit and is also a virtual training that also can be covered under the base level through Zoom. Some units actually host their own unit training through emails and using PDF slides. Ours actually does go through base level though. And then also information assurance training, which is the one that's also provided by the Air Force. The policies that are covered for transmission of data availability would be the OPSEC CNSSI documentation 3029, which talks about providing and securing the encryption and decryption technology, pretty much securing the devices again, and then computer security, which is AFMAN 17-1301, and making sure that it is being secure. The technology that is used to preserve the availability of data while it's in transmission or while it's in transit would be the voice over IP or the VoIP phones, fax machines, printers, and then also 802.1 X authentication, which is pretty much ensuring that it's not only just secure, but also making sure it's available to whoever is supposed to receive it or submit it and being able to still access it. The training for data storage for availability would be the information assurance again provided by the Air Force, but the policies and practice that are currently in place by the Air Force is Air Force document MTL 2018-296-002, which provides the requirements for removable media. which essentially having to have it whitelisted or being able to have it connected to information systems, having the approval for it. And ways that you're able to have access at all times and keeping it secure but still being able to be stored is the cloud services or cloud technology. So we have OneDrive, and also having a solid state drive or our servers. Now, lastly, we have the processing of data to making sure it's available during processing would be the ComSec program. It ensures that users or members that run the communication security program understand how to make sure the data is still available, but still being able to be processed, but still secure, which also includes the communication transmission access controls, which is the encryption and decryption devices themselves. The policies and practices that's covered under this is the ComSec AFC or Air Force document 7700, which covers the operation of the cryptographic technology. And the technology that's used with this would be the encryption decryption technology under the KG 175 models. Then also the VPNs or virtual private networks also secure or ensure availability while processing data. Now, a large portion of trying to implement a IT governance is making sure you select the proper or the most fitting IT governance that you could find for your organization. So the first steps you should do prior to actually selecting one is actually taking into consideration your IT structure or your organizational structure, and also its security awareness, and also how it should be implemented and its primary functions. Now, with the 735th having a support role of IT and also having a primary function of the different not data processing, but cargo processing, personnel processing, resource processing across the Indian Ocean and Pacific Ocean and then back to the United States. The primary primary IT governance that I would recommend to actually implement into the 735th AMS would be the NIST Risk Management Framework, or NIST RMF. And that's because the framework actually has a 7-step process of how to essentially review or to assess risk management or assess risk within the organization by factoring in the IT assets, and you can actually use it with any kind of asset, making sure you can assess the risks that are involved with that kind of asset and also within your organization. So if your organization's a certain type of environment or so, it actually is able to allow you to categorize your assets and then see what risks are there, and also being able to implement other governance or different frameworks to ensure that you're able to mitigate the risk. And then it also allows you to repeat the process periodically. So I would implement this because it is a model that you could use more on a regular basis, while we are currently only using risk management whenever it's needed. It's not really brought up every so often, so we only use it if not during the initial phases of a project. We don't use it to regularly check up on the current assets that's already installed. Another one I would actually also involve would be the COBIT model, because it also enhances the security principles that's already in place, and allows to enhance the business side or business aspect of an organization. And since we have primary function that's outside of the IT realm, COBIT would actually be able to enhance those separate functions and making sure that their quality and productivity also is increased with our clients that's across the Pacific and also back in the United States mainland. Now, as far as IT implementation goes for the 735th AMS, everything starts first with pretty much routing or presenting the concept to leadership. So pretty much my IT department manager head He would be the first one to review it, and he would route it up towards his boss until it reaches the upper management or the top level of the organization or organizational management. And once it reaches approval from them, it would then be presented by myself and my boss at a department meeting where it's held by the organization, in which I present the requirements that goes into each IT governance and what the IT governance plan is as far as time frames, how it will affect the different departments, and any workarounds that's going to be needed during the implementation of this governance, or if any. Um, and then also being able to provide uh, descriptive timelines for backups and how we would have to actually implement ourselves into making sure the governance implementation goes smoothly. So for the NIST RMF framework itself and implementing it, I would first start by testing it myself within my department, not just myself, but with other personnel, the 3 military and 3 civilians, and having all of us test RMF with just the assets that's sitting around us, making sure we're able to document and see how it affects our own work center. And if it seems positive and able to actually influence our pretty much our ability to monitor or improve certain aspects of our organization, then we would actually start routing it up towards our leadership, which we would include the statistics and proof that it would actually be justifiable into implementing it outside of our department. And then afterwards, once it's approved at that level, I would actually present it to the department managers, which they would actually take it to their own departments and start with themselves as far as implementing the RMF model or RMF framework, NIST RMF framework. And then once it's completed by them and they are comfortable with it, I would proceed for them to have it go down to their subordinates. This would actually ensure that RMF isn't reaching the whole organization too fast. So that way, not too many people are being held to hold RMF at all times when it's not feasible for certain areas. If it's not feasible for, say, maintenance or for cargo processing, it's something that could be avoided versus forcing it upon the whole department itself and causing a function to receive degradation or hindrance from a framework. Now with COVID itself, I would also go through the process of routing it, but first testing it within my section first, and then after that routing it up the leadership chain, and then getting approval, and then having the department heads or department managers meet with me and presenting them the framework. The difference between the two that I would do is that the NIST RMF framework, one, I would set a time frame of about 2 weeks between each implementation level, making sure that it actually works at that level before proceeding to the next one. But RMF framework, I would specifically try to limit it not to be an everyday thing, but more so meeting almost every 2 weeks to just to make sure that RMF is actually being performed at areas that it was working at before, or just when introducing it, just seeing if we can actually get a new status every so often. COVID itself, I would actually want it to be implemented at every level and making sure that it's actually being followed throughout at all times, because it's actually a model or framework that actually fits not just IT but outside the IT industry. Now, establishing the new governance is important for having organizations function properly and also ensuring that it develops in the future. It's having the ability to implement new governance in the future too. So establishing it now actually would get ahead of the curve and being able to prevent adversaries from accessing our IT, because we have increased IT security and functionality, and also making sure the um, framework forces us to do a periodic monitoring and active improvement of all the IT support systems and functions. This would increase security for all areas, because all areas or all functions actually do use IT systems and IT functions. And this would make sure that anything that would have been missed without the IT governance um, is actually covered under it. Now, the IT resources, logistics, and IT strategy. The 735th AMS IT network does run off the backbone provided by the 747th Command Squadron or Communication Squadron, known as the 747CS. They have their own network that we connect to, so they host the Air Force network, and we have switches that backbone into their infrastructure, and our switches essentially connect all of our systems and our networks together to provide the 735th AMS network itself. The 747th is in charge of their side of the network and also being able to authorize access to connect to their network. So anything that's connected to it, they have to control. And they also control anything that's cloud hosted, anything that's external to our network typically goes through them. Now, the other thing is the technology within the 735th is pretty much ordered based on a need or requirement basis. So when a system goes down, or if something is obsolete, or if the warranty is worn out, that's when we typically order, and we typically order for the top leadership, and the top leadership's technology would typically already be somewhat new, so we would actually trickle that down to the department leadership, and then the department leadership on down to their client department or their employees. With us serving as a support function, our IT strategy is pretty much completely focused on supporting the main functions and also making sure that we're able to grow as a MCA or a multi-capable airman within our unit and learning how to support those different functions, whether deploying or staying in homeland. Now, the process for acquiring new technology and getting it approved starts from, of course, if leadership was to pass to us that they have the request or has us ordering, say, a new server that's reaching the end of life, the first thing we would have to do is first I would route the purchase through the IT resources advisor, which is actually a person that sits in my office. That person would then route it up towards the overall squadron resource advisor, which would check the squadron or the organization funds, making sure that we have enough funds to actually buy the technology. Then after it's approved there, we have a leader or top leadership representative that essentially approves all purchases. Once they approve it, the purchase request actually migrates to the phase of reaching out to vendors or contractors, and it's essentially waiting for approval for a tech or for a vendor to go under contract with us. Now, the purchase request may also go through the 747th if it's something that's going to end up touching the network, and it's more so just to let them know that we're going to end up getting a specific technology that they have to prepare for the network to connect to. Now, the technology, once it's approved and it already has a vendor attached to it, the 747th themselves will wait for the shipment to arrive on location, and then they would provide us with a configuration or information on how to configure the technology, and then we would actually install it in place with them on the phone. But until then, we typically do recycle all IT assets to help out as far as removing old ones, just so that way we can save on funds, because we only have a set amount of funds each fiscal year. So this helps making sure that e-waste is very limited, but also making sure that we're able to at least verify each squadron asset to make sure if it's not functioning, we're actually able to work on it. The issue with this process, though, is that we are waiting typically until end of life or until a item is no longer usable. So with that, it ends up being to where the item is getting aged or obsolete before we actually change it out, or it's not able to meet operating system standards or receive a certain upgrade or update from Microsoft, which by this point is becomes a equipment failure, or it becomes a discrepancy or hindrance to a specific squadron function. And with that being an issue, it actually forces us to actually have to find another workaround for the user or client during the meantime while we're ordering another replacement for the technology. A key ability for us to actually be able to get an item or technology faster is that we're able to try to get used technology from another organization who's either planning on getting rid of it or has extras, and try to have it transferred to us. We have to essentially route a memorandum to the 747, making the transfer official. Now, the 735th AMS IT strategy, as I have stated, was the support of all primary 735th AMS functions, and also making sure we're an MCA or multi-capable airman IT force. The 735th AMS MCA is typically not just the first one. MCAs have been pretty much around and has been implemented by the Air Force and is already in other organizations that also support the C-17 and C-37. General Brown was actually the one that briefed this at HICM prior to us implementing it. And this pretty much forces anybody to be able to perform any duty outside of their career field identifier, as long as it's something that's feasible or something that's within their realm of being able to do. The 735th AMS, the IT members and managers are expected to learn how to do those support functions, whether it's doing airfield management, being able to marshal a plane, or do cargo or personnel processing. We should be able to perform some sort of support function for each of those roles. The 735th IT strategy has been continuously evolving because with new technology, there's been a difference in responsibilities and also being able to be flexible to work in the MCAs. But one of the key examples for the IT strategy itself changing, it's more so cargo processing itself in 2017 originally was doing all their stuff through papers and documentation, which would take a lot of papers and hand jamming it, which they in turn ended up migrating to a fully wireless automated electronic cargo processing system that we manage, and we actually manage to administrate the rights and permissions to it, and it's become one of the main responsibilities that we actually have. And because of this, it's changed our IT strategy from a small presence of just managing the small system nodes to actually having our own network and hosting our own systems and servers as well. Now, we've also become a larger portion of each function within the squadron, the primary functions, because all of the functions have some sort of IT involved with each one. Now, IT project implementation is a step that we have on a regular basis. For this example in particular, or this particular scenario, I chose to do upgrading our servers. We actually have primaries and backups. At the 735th AMS IT department, I first would have to one, research the server that's required by the organization, and then submit it up to the organization management, which if they came to me first and told me it was approved, I would then take it to go through the logistics process that I was already outlined, which is through sending it to the IT resource advisor, and then resource advisor sending it up to the squadron resource advisor, and as well as I would have to actually send it to the 747th CS, which is the base organization, and have it approved. During that time, though, I would have to also submit a purchase approval or a project plan to the base organization that includes the authorization to operate, or the ATO, and also any supporting information, which include the switch port information, the type of server we're trying to purchase, and the operating system and what the primary function of each server would be. So for this example, I would say I'd use a Dell PowerEdge R720, and then we're upgrading from a R710 or so. And the base level would record that and have it pretty much, they would provide a configuration which would most likely mirror the original. And then they would have to wait until we actually received the resource from the vendors. So after we have submitted and it's gone up to resources, and then got approved, and then went to the vendors would actually be selected. And then one of the vendors would ship it out once it's fulfilled, and we would receive the server. From there, I would meet with the company or the organizational department management leaders, and also the organization manager himself, and essentially have a breakdown of the time frame of how the project should take. So, for example, in this particular situation, I would give them 2 weeks or 3 weeks essentially to prepare for this migration, and essentially coordinate a date and time to perform this project, or perform this specific server migration, which I would give them the window of 2 to 3 or 5 to 6 hours, because there could be essentially delays, or something could happen during the middle of the installation, and just want to cover the grounds. Then from there, I would tell them also they need to stop at a certain time to ensure backups are being performed, so that way they don't save something new and it doesn't get copied over by the time we turn off the server, the old server. And then from there, I would coordinate with the base level organization, the 747CS, and inform them of the date that we're planning on actually performing the server migration. And then also receive the server configuration information from the base, so I can actually put that on the new server. During these times, though, I am also fielding questions from the department managers and also from the organization manager, just making sure that they are up to date on workarounds, what to look out for as far as their data and also their information, making sure they're able to connect, or make sure they can move it over to certain areas if they wanted to, say if they wanted OneDrive, or if they wanted to do a different location, or if they just wanted to be connected to the backup server. So from here, once I have a date and time, I would configure the server and put on there first I would wipe it and then put on a new operating system that's provided by base level and meets the standardized requirement, which would be the newest operating system that they have. And then from there, I would start with installing the required securities and making sure it's been patched and up to date first. From there, I would go to and stage it right next to the old server and have it ready, so that way the day of, all we have to do is connect one wire, which is the Ethernet port, and just having that ready. From there, I would go to the office 2 to 3 hours early just to make sure everything's running perfectly, and run a backup, or make sure I stop the server from receiving new updates after I've informed everybody that I'm about to take the server down, and telling them that they can connect to the backup server. I would check the backup server's information, compare it to the primary old server's information, and see if it functions correctly. And then from there, I would actually start with connecting the Ethernet wire to the new server, and then calling the 747CS or the base identity or organization, and informing them that I've installed the new server and that they can actually check the network traffic and make sure that the server is properly functioning and that everything's working on their side of the network. That way, in case port security didn't trip, or there's no possible issues that could be faced as far as the server being misconfigured or using the wrong NIC card. This from here, I would start with calling each user, making sure that everything's connected, and making sure that they're able to connect. And once the server's been up for 2 to 3 hours already, I would then start making sure that backups are working properly, making sure users are able to access their old data, and making sure everything matches up right. Otherwise, I'd have to pull from the backup server. Then from there, 2 to 3 weeks after it's been functioning successfully, I would start disassembling the old server and prepping it to go back to base level for disposal or for repurposing, because the base can actually reallocate to another unit. So from here, I would start by degaussing or shredding the hard drives at base level, because they have their own separate shop for that, or office for that. And then from that office, if it's being repurposed, I would degauss to make sure the data is unreadable. And if it's being disposed, I would shred it, of course. But I would take it to the logistics shop there, or logistics department of the 747CS, and they would actually be able to repurpose it and essentially remove it from our area of responsibility. Once all this is said and done, I would then proceed and move to the backup server, which would be a printer and file server as well, and pretty much just making sure those are set and making sure those are ready for migrating as well. So I would order the same servers and getting those ready. And also, in this particular situation for the backup servers, I wouldn't have to let users know too much as far as having to switch over from a different server or having to save their work for a particular location. Instead, I would give them an FYI, essentially, that if you are using this still, please switch over back to the primary, just in case they were left out in the original migration. Now, the main barriers we are facing at the 735th AMS IT department is that we are located on an island, so it limits the amount of vendors that we have, the resources we have, so we're not able to get the newest technology. And even the technology that's there, it's in high demand because we're not the only organization that's demanding the same requirements. So a lot of times our requirements do end up getting delayed because vendors are trying to cover all of the demands of all the organizations across the island. Now, ways we can alleviate the high demand and the technological barriers, such as we're not able to get the newest technology, we can essentially go to another organization that if they have extras of a particular technology, or if they are planning on disposing of a particular or repurposing a specific IT asset, we're able to actually have it transferred or talk to them, communicate and coordinate transferring it over to us, the responsibility. But we would have to make it official with the base level, the 747 CS, and have them pretty much write a memorandum up to them saying that we are taking responsibility for the asset. Now, the transfer process functions pretty quickly, but the extras, as far as an organization has, is typically very, very rare unless you have a a person or somebody within a adjacent unit. But it does happen where you're able to get older, not the newest, but a little bit older IT technologies to use. Now, again, the base serves as the infrastructure for the 735th AMS IT network, and we do connect our switches to their network, and then we end up using those switches to act as our own internal network for the 735th AMS, and all our IT network assets do connect to those switches. Now, the 747 or the base organization actually controls and monitors their network assets and ensures from their side no unauthorized accesses are being made, and all network items have to be approved prior to being connected to the network, whether it's USB approval, aka removable media, or if it's actually networked through LAN or Ethernet cable, it would have to get approved through them too as well. Project implementation at the 735th AMS does have to get coordinated with 747th base organization, and essentially with them, the organization manager of the 735th AMS, and also the department managers, just to make sure the project is successful. So everybody's keen in on one specific project timeline and project expectations. Now, that there concludes my presentation. These are currently the references I use for this presentation.